The moment Marcus saw Lena's hearing aids, his smile died. In a crowded cafe, surrounded by strangers sipping coffee and lost in their own worlds, he turned her disability into a public spectacle. "You're deaf? Seriously?" His voice carried across marble tables, turning heads, freezing conversations. "I don't have time for this kind of complication. You should have told me up front. This is too much." Lena's hands trembled as every eye found her, judging, pitying. But at the next table, a man with kind eyes and a small daughter watched everything, and he understood exactly what courage looked like. If you're wondering whether kindness can rewrite the cruelest moments of our lives, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had started as a whisper against the cafe windows, gentle enough to be romantic if Lena Harper had been in the mood for romance. She wasn't. Romance required confidence, and confidence had abandoned her somewhere between the third outfit change and the moment she'd nearly canceled this entire terrible idea. The Riverside Cafe occupied a converted warehouse along the waterfront, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place that attracted young professionals who wanted to feel cultured without trying too hard. Lena had chosen a corner table, close enough to watch the door, but far enough from the main cluster of customers that she hoped to avoid being the center of attention. The heating system hummed against the October chill, and the espresso machine released periodic bursts of steam that she felt more than heard. Her phone sat face up on the table beside an untouched latte that had long since stopped steaming. 7:15. Marcus was 15 minutes late, which could mean traffic or second thoughts, or simply the kind of casual disrespect that came from not valuing someone else's time. Lena had learned to recognize the difference, though she preferred not to dwell on which category Marcus might fall into. She adjusted her hearing aids for the third time in as many minutes, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. The devices were small, nearly invisible against her dark hair, but she felt them constantly, dual reminders that her body didn't work the way bodies were supposed to work, that she existed at a slight remove from the world everyone else inhabited so effortlessly. The cafe's ambient noise washed over her in incomplete waves. Conversations registered as rhythm without content, laughter as texture without context. She'd learned to read lips years ago, had become remarkably skilled at filling in the blanks, at nodding at appropriate moments and smiling when faces suggested jokes had been told. But first dates didn't allow for the usual accommodations. First dates required the pretense of normalcy, and normalcy exhausted her. Her friend Rachel had set this up, insisting that Lena needed to get back out there after what Rachel called her hermit phase, and what Lena privately thought of as self-preservation. Rachel meant well, the way people who'd never felt fundamentally different from those around them always meant well. She'd shown Lena photos of Marcus, attractive in that generic way that suggested good genes and a decent gym membership, smiling in front of exotic locations that proved he had disposable income and a valid passport. "He's perfect," Rachel had promised, which should have been Lena's first warning sign. Perfect people didn't date imperfect ones. Lena had learned this lesson repeatedly, though apparently not permanently. The cafe door opened with a gust of wet wind, and Marcus stepped inside. Lena recognized him immediately from the photos, though real life had added a few pounds and subtracted some hair. He wore a tailored jacket that looked expensive and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His eyes swept the cafe with the efficient assessment of someone used to making quick judgments. When his gaze landed on Lena, something flickered across his face. Recognition, followed by what might have been disappointment, quickly masked by a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He crossed the cafe with the confident stride of a man who'd never questioned whether he belonged in any space he chose to occupy. "Lena?" He didn't wait for confirmation before sliding into the chair across from her, bringing with him the smell of expensive cologne and rain-damp wool. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." His lips were easy to read, the apology smooth and practiced. Lena offered what she hoped was a warm smile, though her face felt stiff with nerves. "It's okay. I haven't been here long." The lie came easily. Small lies always did. They were social lubricant, the price of admission to normal human interaction. Marcus shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over the chairback, then flagged down a server with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never waited for anything in his life. A young woman appeared almost immediately, order pad ready, her ponytail swinging as she leaned in to hear his request. Double espresso, extra shot, and he glanced at Lena's latte. You want anything else? I'm good, thanks. The server nodded and disappeared, and Marcus turned his full attention to Lena for the first time. His eyes traveled over her face with an intensity that made her want to check if she had something stuck between her teeth. Then his gaze snagged on something, and his expression changed. The smile faltered. His eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on the small devices tucked behind her ears. Lena's stomach dropped. She'd known this moment would come. It always did. But knowing didn't make it easier. Some people handled the revelation with grace, asking thoughtful questions and making reasonable accommodations. Others treated her disability like a character flaw, as if she'd chosen to be deaf out of stubbornness or poor life choices. She couldn't tell yet which kind of person Marcus would be, but the shift in his expression didn't suggest the graceful option. Are those... He leaned forward slightly, and Lena felt her face heat with the kind of embarrassment that came from being examined like a specimen under glass. Are those hearing aids? The question hung between them, loud enough that Lena imagined everyone in the cafe must have heard it, though rationally she knew that was impossible. Still, she felt exposed, as if Marcus had announced her private medical history to the entire room. Yes, she kept her voice steady, refusing to apologize for her own body. I'm deaf. Severe hearing loss since birth. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. He sat back in his chair, and something happened to his face. A kind of shutting down, like curtains being drawn across windows. The polite interest that had been there moments before vanished, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like disgust. You're deaf. He said it slowly, as if testing the words in his mouth and finding them distasteful. I wear hearing aids. Lena fought to keep her voice even, though anger was beginning to kindle beneath the embarrassment. I read lips. I communicate just fine. But you're deaf. He repeated it like an accusation, and now other customers were starting to glance their way, drawn by the edge in his voice. Rachel didn't mention that. She said you were great, that you were smart and funny, and... He made a frustrated gesture. She didn't say anything about you being disabled. The word landed like a slap. Not because Lena rejected the label, she'd long since made peace with the clinical description of her condition, but because of the way Marcus said it, with the kind of revulsion usually reserved for discussing rot or disease. I am disabled. Lena lifted her chin, refusing to shrink even as every instinct screamed at her to make herself smaller, to apologize, to smooth this over. That doesn't make me less than anyone else. Doesn't it? Marcus's voice had risen now, loud enough that conversations at nearby tables were dying mid-sentence. The cafe's ambient noise dropped away, replaced by the terrible silence of strangers witnessing a private humiliation becoming public. Come on, be honest. This is a lot to deal with. Dating someone who's deaf, that's a major complication. That's equipment and accommodations and having to repeat yourself constantly. That's what, exactly? Lena heard her voice shake and hated herself for it. She wanted to sound strong, unbothered, but fury and shame were tangling in her throat, making it hard to breathe. That's too much work? That's not worth your precious time? Yes! The word came out sharp enough to make Lena flinch. Marcus leaned forward, his face twisted with an anger that seemed wildly disproportionate to the situation. Yes, okay? I'm sorry, but I have to be honest here. This is not what I signed up for. I'm looking for a relationship, not a charity case. I don't have the time or energy to deal with someone who needs constant special treatment. The cafe had gone completely quiet now. Lena could feel the weight of every stare, the uncomfortable pity radiating from strangers who were witnessing her worst nightmare play out in real time. A woman at the counter had her phone out, though whether to call someone or record this disaster, Lena couldn't tell. You should have told me up front. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound Lena felt more than heard. You should have been honest in your profile. This is false advertising. This is... He grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky with barely controlled anger. This is too much. I'm sorry, but I can't do this. Lena sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would make him feel even a fraction of the humiliation currently burning through her chest. But no words came. Her throat had closed around shame and fury, leaving her mute in the face of his cruelty. Marcus pulled on his jacket with sharp, angry movements. "Good luck finding someone who's willing to take this on. You're going to need it." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. The cafe door opened and closed, and then he was gone, leaving Lena alone at a table in a room full of strangers who had just watched her be dissected and discarded like something defective. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Lena stared at her latte, at the foam that had long since dissolved into beige liquid, and willed herself not to cry. Crying would make this worse. Crying would confirm what Marcus had just announced to everyone within earshot, that she was pitiable, that she was damaged, that she was too much trouble for anyone to bother with. Her vision blurred anyway. Tears gathered along her lower lashes, hot and shameful, and she blinked rapidly, trying to force them back. Around her, conversations were slowly resuming, people returning to their own lives now that the drama had concluded. But she could still feel their sidelong glances, the way their attention kept drifting back to her like drivers passing a car accident. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of this cafe, out of this terrible night, back to the safety of her apartment, where no one could look at her like she was broken. Her hands shook as she reached for her purse, fumbling with the clasp. "Excuse me." The voice came from her left, and Lena looked up to find a man standing beside her table. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, and eyes that held something she couldn't quite name. Concern, maybe, or anger on her behalf. A little girl stood beside him, 7 or 8 years old, with the same dark curls and a pink backpack decorated with cartoon cats. The man's hands moved as he spoke, and Lana's breath caught. He was signing. His fingers formed shapes with the fluid confidence of someone who'd been using ASL for years, not the stilted uncertainty of someone who'd learned a few phrases from a YouTube video. That man was cruel. You didn't deserve that. The kindness in those simple signs nearly broke her. Lena felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were different from the shameful ones she'd been fighting moments before. These came from the sudden, overwhelming relief of being understood, of being seen by someone who recognized her humanity instead of her limitations. She signed back, her hands clumsy with emotion. "Thank you." The little girl tugged on the man's sleeve, and he bent down so she could whisper in his ear. Whatever she said made him smile, a warmth that transformed his entire face. He straightened and signed again, this time with the girl watching intently. "My daughter Mia wants to know if you're okay, and if maybe you'd like some company." Lena glanced at the girl, Mia, who was looking at her with the kind of open curiosity children had before the world taught them to be cruel. There was no pity in her expression, no uncomfortable sympathy, just genuine interest in something that might have been solidarity. "I'm okay," Lena signed, though they all knew it was a lie. "But I wouldn't mind company." The man pulled out the chair Marcus had vacated. Lena felt a fierce satisfaction at how easily he was being replaced, and helped Mia into the seat beside it before settling down himself. Up close, Lena could see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind that came from smiling more than frowning, and the wedding ring's absence on his left hand. "I'm Ethan," he said aloud, his lips easy to read. "Ethan Cole, and this is Mia." "Lena Harper." She was grateful her voice had steadied, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I appreciate this, but you don't have to—" Ethan held up a hand, cutting her off gently. Then his fingers moved again, forming words that landed with the weight of shared experience. "We saw what happened, all of it. And I need you to know that man is an idiot who doesn't deserve 5 minutes of your time, let alone a lifetime." Mia nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing. She signed something to her father, her movements still learning their fluidity. Ethan smiled and turned back to Lena. "Mia says anyone who thinks hearing aids are a problem has clearly never seen how cool they look. She's been asking for purple ones." Despite everything, Lena felt a smile tug at her lips. Purple would be excellent. Mia beamed and signed again, this time directly to Lena. "Can I see yours?" There was no self-consciousness in the request. No awkwardness. just pure childhood curiosity. Lena pulled her hair back, revealing the small devices, and Mia leaned in to examine them with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. "They're so small," Mia signed, her face scrunched in concentration. "Mine will be bigger, and purple, and maybe with glitter." "Yours?" Lena looked between Mia and Ethan, understanding dawning. Ethan's expression shifted, a shadow passing over his face. "Mia's losing her hearing, progressive sensorineural hearing loss. The doctors say she'll be profoundly deaf within 2 years, maybe less." The clinical terms didn't quite mask the pain underneath. Lena recognized it, the grief of watching a child navigate a world that wouldn't accommodate her, the fury at a body that was betraying someone too young to understand why. She'd seen that same expression on her own mother's face countless times. "I'm sorry," Lena said, because that's what people said, even though the words never helped. "Don't be." Ethan's voice was firm. "We're learning ASL together, making adjustments, and Mia's handling it better than I am, honestly." He ruffled his daughter's hair affectionately. "She's tougher than both of us combined." Mia signed something that made Ethan laugh, and Lena found herself relaxing for the first time all evening. The cafe's ambient noise had returned to normal levels, the other customers' attention drifting away now that the entertainment had concluded. But at this small corner table, a different kind of energy was building, tentative, careful, but real. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "And please tell me if I'm overstepping, but that guy, Marcus, he said some things that were not just rude, but factually wrong. And I'm wondering if you hear that kind of ignorance often." Lena considered the question. Most people didn't ask. They either treated her disability like something to politely ignore or like a tragedy to sympathize with. Ethan was doing neither. He was simply asking, person to person, about her actual lived experience. "More often than I'd like," she admitted. "Not always that explicit. Usually it's more subtle. The person who stops texting after the first date. The job interview that goes great until they notice the hearing aids. The friends who get tired of repeating themselves and slowly stop including me. That's exhausting." "It is." The acknowledgement felt like relief. "And the worst part is, you start to internalize it. You start to wonder if maybe they're right, if maybe you are too much trouble, if maybe you should just—" She stopped, horrified that she'd said so much to a stranger. But Ethan didn't look uncomfortable or pitying. He looked angry on her behalf, which was somehow exactly what she needed. "My ex-wife said something similar once." His jaw tightened. "When Mia's diagnosis came back, she said she hadn't signed up for a defective kid. Those were her actual words, defective." Lena sucked in a breath. "That's horrible." "It was honest, at least. She left 6 months later, said she couldn't handle the stress." Ethan glanced at Mia, who was now coloring on a napkin with crayons that had appeared from her backpack. "Best thing that ever happened to us, honestly. We didn't need someone who saw Mia as a burden." "I can hear you talking about me," Mia signed without looking up from her drawing. "Just so you know." Ethan grinned. "We're saying nice things. Mostly." "Mostly?" "I might have mentioned that time you put salt in my coffee." "That was an accident." "Was it, though?" They signed back and forth, a practiced rhythm that spoke of countless similar exchanges. Watching them, Lena felt something loosen in her chest. This was what love looked like when it wasn't conditional. This was what acceptance looked like when it was genuine. The server appeared with Ethan's espresso, then glanced at Lena. "Can I get you anything else?" Lena looked at her cold latte, at Ethan and Mia, who had somehow transformed this nightmare evening into something almost bearable, and made a decision. "Hot chocolate, please, with extra whipped cream." "Make that 3, Ethan added. "This feels like a hot chocolate kind of night." The server nodded and disappeared, and Mia looked up from her drawing with delight. "With marshmallows?" "Obviously with marshmallows," Ethan signed. "What kind of barbarians do you think we are?" Lena laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deeper than politeness. Mia grinned and went back to her drawing, which appeared to involve cats, rainbows, and what might have been a rocket ship. "So," Ethan said, settling back in his chair with the ease of someone who'd decided to stay a while. "Tell me about yourself. The real stuff. not the dating profile highlights. What do you do when you're not being subjected to terrible blind dates? The question was so normal, so refreshingly mundane after everything that had happened, that Lena almost didn't know how to answer. When was the last time someone had asked about her life as if it might be interesting rather than tragic? I'm a graphic designer, she said. Freelance, mostly. I work from home, which is both wonderful and isolating in equal measure. What kind of design? Branding, mostly. Logos, marketing materials, website design. I like the puzzle of it, figuring out how to communicate a company's identity visually. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Visual communication for someone who experiences the world differently than most people. It wasn't a question, but Lena found herself answering anyway. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, maybe. I've always been better at showing than telling. Show me something. What? Your work. Show me something you've designed. Lena hesitated, then pulled out her phone and scrolled through her portfolio. She selected a recent project, a rebrand for a local coffee roaster that she was particularly proud of. The logo featured a phoenix rising from flames made of coffee beans, rendered in warm golds and deep browns. Ethan studied it carefully, and Lena watched his face for the polite but disinterested expression she'd learned to expect. It didn't come. Instead, he zoomed in on details, examining the way the flames transitioned into wings, the negative space that formed a coffee cup at the phoenix's heart. "This is really good," he said, and there was genuine appreciation in his voice. "The symbolism is elegant without being heavy-handed, and the color palette is warm but sophisticated. You know design? I'm an architect. Different field, same principles. Form, function, meaning." He handed back her phone. "Do you like it? The work?" "Most of the time, it's solitary, which can be lonely, but it's also mine, you know? I control my environment, my schedule, no office politics or team meetings where I have to fight to understand what's being said." "Safety through isolation," Ethan said quietly. The observation was too accurate for comfort. Lena looked away, focusing on Mia's drawing. "Something like that." "I get it. After Sarah left, that's Mia's mom, I did the same thing. Pulled back, kept to myself, told myself it was about protecting Mia, about maintaining stability. But really I was just scared of getting hurt again." "And now?" "Now?" Ethan glanced at his daughter, his expression softening. "Now I'm trying to teach Mia that hiding isn't living, that the right people won't require you to be someone you're not, that—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That the world is full of Marcus types, but it's also full of people who will see you and value you exactly as you are." The server returned with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, each crowned with a mountain of whipped cream and a generous handful of marshmallows. Mia's eyes went wide with delight, and she immediately began fishing out marshmallows with a spoon. Lena wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "You're very wise for someone who just crashed my disaster date. I prefer to think of it as rescuing you from a disaster date. Is that what this is? A rescue?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I think it's 2 people who understand each other having hot chocolate. The rescue was incidental." Mia tapped her father's arm and signed something with chocolate-covered fingers. Ethan laughed and signed back, and Lena watched their conversation with a growing sense of something she couldn't quite name. Not envy, exactly. More like recognition. This was what she'd always wanted. Connection without explanation, understanding without effort. "Mia wants to know if you like cats," Ethan translated. "I love cats. I have 2, actually. Simon and Schuster." Mia's face lit up, and she signed rapidly, her hands moving almost too fast for Lena to follow. Ethan interpreted. "She says those are excellent names. She wants to know if they're big or small, what color they are, and do they do tricks." For the next 20 minutes, Lena found herself in an animated discussion about cats, showing Mia photos on her phone and describing Simon's tendency to knock things off counters and Schuster's habit of sleeping in the bathroom sink. Mia reciprocated with stories about the neighbor's dog that she walked sometimes, a golden retriever named Captain who was afraid of squirrels. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silence that came from not needing to fill every moment with sound. Ethan contributed occasionally, but mostly he watched, his expression unreadable but not cold. Lena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. When Mia finally yawned, a jaw-cracking gesture that suggested genuine exhaustion rather than boredom, Ethan checked his watch and sighed. "It's past someone's bedtime," he said aloud, then signed the same to Mia. Mia made an exaggerated sad face but didn't argue. She signed to Lena. "Will we see you again?" The question caught Lena off guard. She looked at Ethan, uncertain. This had been nice, wonderful even, but it was also a chance encounter. People didn't actually build relationships from awkward cafe meetings. Except Ethan was looking at her with something like hope in his eyes, and suddenly Lena found herself wanting very much to see where this might go. "I'd like that," she said. Ethan pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? Maybe we could do this again sometime, intentionally." They exchanged information, and as Ethan helped Mia into her coat and gathered their things, Lena felt a strange reluctance for them to leave. The cafe suddenly seemed too large, too empty, despite the other customers still scattered throughout. At the door, Ethan paused and turned back. He crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, and for a moment Lena thought he might hug her. Instead, he signed, his movements deliberate and clear. "What that man said to you tonight was wrong. You're not a burden. You're not too much. You deserve someone who sees all of you and chooses you anyway. Don't settle for less." Before Lena could respond, before she could process the sudden burning in her eyes, Ethan smiled and guided Mia out into the rainy night. The door closed behind them, and Lena was alone again at her corner table, the dregs of her hot chocolate going cold. But something had shifted. The humiliation from earlier still stung, but it felt distant now, separated from her by the memory of Ethan's signing hands and Mia's chocolate-covered grin. Marcus's cruelty had tried to define her, to reduce her to her disability and nothing more. Ethan had reminded her that she was so much more than that. Lena gathered her things and left the cafe, stepping out into the rain that had intensified while she'd been inside. The cold droplets hit her face, washing away the last traces of tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. Around her, the city moved with its usual Friday night energy, couples hurrying to restaurants, groups of friends laughing their way between bars, solitary figures hunched against the weather. She was one of them now, no longer the spectacle at the center of someone else's cruelty, just another person navigating the world, trying to find connection in the spaces between strangers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from an unknown number. "This is Ethan. Mia says thank you for talking to her about cats, and I say thank you for letting us interrupt your evening. I know tonight was hard, but I hope it ended better than it started." Lena stood on the wet sidewalk, reading the message 3 times. Then she typed back, "It ended better. Thank you for that. For seeing me when I felt invisible." The response came almost immediately. "You're impossible to miss." Simple words on a screen, but they settled into Lena's chest like something solid, something she could hold on to on nights when the world felt too loud and she felt too different. She pocketed her phone and started walking toward the parking garage, her steps lighter than they'd been in months. Behind her, the cafe glowed warm against the rain-dark street. Inside, strangers continued their conversations, unaware that something significant had just happened at that corner table. A woman had been broken down and built back up in the space of an hour. A connection had been forged from shared understanding and hot chocolate. And somewhere across the city, a single father was tucking his daughter into bed, both of them thinking about the deaf woman who'd laughed at their jokes and admired their ASL. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, and Lena drove home through the shining dark, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the world contained more Ethans than Marcus's after all. She just had to be brave enough to keep looking. The text arrived 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, when Lena was elbow-deep in a logo revision that wasn't working no matter how many times she adjusted the kerning. Her phone buzzed against the desk, and she glanced at it, expecting another client email or her mother's daily check-in. Instead, Ethan's name appeared on the screen. "Coffee this weekend? Mia has been asking about your cats non-stop. I think she's planning to quiz you on their favorite foods and sleeping habits." Lena stared at the message, her cursor blinking uselessly on the screen in front of her. The smart thing would be to decline politely. Ethan seemed kind, and Mia was delightful, but getting involved with a single father and his daughter meant complications she'd spent years avoiding. It meant opening herself up to the possibility of becoming attached to people who might eventually decide she was too much work. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, composing and deleting responses. "I'm busy this weekend." "Too cold." "That sounds nice, but I don't think it's a good idea." "Too honest." "Sure, what time?" "Too eager." The cursor continued its patient blinking. On her desk, Simon stretched across a stack of invoices, his orange tail twitching in his sleep. Through the window, autumn sunlight filtered through the maple tree outside, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floor of her home office. Lena thought about Friday night, about the way Mia's face had lit up when discussing cats, about Ethan's quiet fury on her behalf. She thought about how rarely anyone had stood up for her the way he had, without being asked, without expecting gratitude or recognition. She typed quickly before she could overthink it. "Saturday morning? There's a cafe near the Botanical Gardens that does excellent pancakes." The response came within minutes. "Perfect." 10 a.m.? Fair warning, Mia will probably bring a list of cat questions. She's very thorough. "I'll prepare accordingly," Lena wrote back, and she was smiling as she returned to the logo that still wasn't working, though somehow it bothered her less now. Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Lena changed her outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a burgundy sweater that her friend Rachel had once said made her look approachable. She spent 20 minutes on her hair before realizing she was being ridiculous and pulling it into a simple ponytail. The hearing aids were visible, small and unapologetic behind her ears, and she left them that way. The garden cafe sat at the edge of the city's botanical gardens, a converted greenhouse with walls of glass and tables scattered between potted ferns and hanging ivy. Lena arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a table near the windows where natural light would make lip reading easier. The morning crowd was sparse, a few couples lingering over coffee, a woman reading a paperback novel, an elderly man doing a crossword puzzle with the focused intensity of someone treating it like a competitive sport. Ethan and Mia appeared right at 10, Mia practically vibrating with excitement as they navigated between tables. She wore a purple jacket decorated with cat patches and carried a small notebook with a rainbow cover. Ethan looked tired but happy, his hair slightly damp as if he'd rushed through a shower. "We're not late, are we?" he asked as they reached the table, his hands already moving through the familiar shapes of ASL even as he spoke aloud. "Right on time." Lena smiled at Mia, who was staring at her with the kind of intense focus that suggested serious business was about to be conducted. "Hello, Mia." "Hello," Mia signed, then immediately opened her notebook to reveal pages covered in careful handwriting. "I have questions about cats. Many questions. Dad says I should ask if it's okay first, but I think if you're here, it means you're okay with questions." Ethan groaned. "Mia, we talked about this. Social conventions exist for a reason." "Social conventions are boring," Mia signed matter-of-factly. "Cats are interesting." Lena laughed, genuinely delighted. "Ask away. I'm an open book when it comes to Simon & Schuster." For the next half hour, while they ordered and ate pancakes that were indeed excellent, Mia worked through her list with the methodical determination of a researcher gathering data. She wanted to know everything: what the cats ate, where they slept, whether they fought or cuddled, if they had favorite toys, whether they came when called, how Lena had chosen their names, and approximately 47 other questions that ranged from practical to philosophical. Ethan interjected occasionally to remind his daughter that Lena might want to eat her breakfast, but Lena waved him off. There was something wonderful about Mia's unfiltered curiosity, the way she asked questions without the careful distance most people maintained. She wasn't treating Lena like a fragile thing that needed gentle handling. She was treating her like a person who possessed information Mia wanted. "Why Simon & Schuster?" Mia asked aloud, her voice careful and deliberate. She was still practicing speaking, Lena realized, still learning to navigate between the hearing world and the one she was entering. "They're publishers," Lena explained. "Big companies that make books. I thought it was funny, naming cats after a publishing house. Like they're very serious and important." "Are they serious and important?" "Simon thinks he is. Schuster knows he's ridiculous and doesn't care." Mia giggled and wrote this down in her notebook with the gravity of someone recording vital research data. Ethan caught Lena's eye over his daughter's bent head and mouthed, "Thank you." And Lena felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. When Mia finally closed her notebook, declaring herself satisfied with the information gathered, Ethan seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "So, Lena, Mia and I were talking, and we were wondering if maybe you'd like to come to her ASL class next week. It's at the community center on Thursday evenings. Very casual, lots of families with deaf kids or kids who are losing their hearing. Good people." Lena set down her fork, surprised. "You want me to come to Mia's class?" "We thought you might like to meet other people who sign," Ethan said carefully. "And honestly, Mia wants to show you off to her friend Emma. Apparently Emma's been bragging about her mom's deaf colleague, and Mia wants to even the score. Emma thinks she's so cool because her mom works with a deaf person," Mia signed, rolling her eyes with the practiced disdain of an 8-year-old navigating complex social hierarchies. "But I actually have a deaf friend. That's way cooler." "Friend?" Lena's voice came out softer than she intended. The word caught in her throat, unfamiliar in this context. She had work acquaintances, people she'd gone to school with who occasionally texted, Rachel who meant well but didn't quite understand. But friends, real friends who chose her company, who valued her presence. Those had been in short supply for longer than she wanted to admit. "Yes, friend," Mia signed firmly, as if the matter had been settled long ago and Lena was just now catching up. "Friends have pancakes together and talk about cats. That's what we're doing. So we're friends." The logic was airtight, delivered with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned that friendship was supposed to be complicated. Ethan was watching Lana with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between amusement and understanding. "The class would be good for you," he said quietly. "Not because you need it, obviously you're fluent in ASL, but because it's nice to be around people who get it, who don't treat signing like a party trick or a tragic necessity." He was right, and Lena knew it. She'd been isolated for so long, had built such careful walls around herself, that the idea of deliberately seeking out community felt both terrifying and necessary. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Thursday evening. I'll be there." Mia's face lit up with triumph, and she immediately returned to her notebook, apparently making plans for how to best showcase her new friend to the envious Emma. Ethan smiled at Lena, warm and genuine, and she felt something shift in her chest, a door she'd locked years ago creaking open just slightly. They stayed at the cafe until nearly noon, long after their plates had been cleared and their coffee cups refilled. The conversation wandered through easy topics, Mia's school, Lena's current design projects, Ethan's work on a new library building downtown. But underneath the casual exchange ran a current of something deeper, an understanding that they were all learning the same difficult lesson about navigating a world that wasn't built for people like them. When they finally left, stepping out into autumn sunshine that turned the garden's remaining flowers into jewels, Mia insisted on walking between them, holding both their hands. It felt natural in a way that should have been alarming, this instant intimacy with people she'd known less than a week. "Same time next Saturday?" Ethan asked as they reached the parking lot, his free hand signing the question for Mia's benefit. "Next Saturday," Lena confirmed, and Mia squeezed her hand in approval. She drove home in a daze, her mind replaying the morning in fragments. Mia's earnest questions, Ethan's quiet observations, the way they'd made space for her at their table without her having to ask for it. Her apartment felt too quiet when she let herself in, though Simon and Schuster provided their usual chaotic greeting, twining around her ankles and demanding attention. "I made friends," she told them as she refilled their food bowls. "Actual friends. Can you believe it?" Simon meowed his indifference. Schuster knocked a pen off the counter, which was his standard response to most situations. The week passed in a strange blur of work and anticipation. Lena found herself thinking about Thursday's ASL class at odd moments, wondering what it would be like to be in a room full of people who communicated the way she did. She'd avoided such spaces before, had told herself it was because she didn't need them, because she was fine on her own. But the truth was, she'd been afraid of what it might mean to admit she was part of a community she'd spent years trying to transcend. Thursday evening arrived cool and clear. The community center occupied a converted elementary school, all linoleum floors and bulletin boards covered in construction paper announcements. Lena followed the signs to the gymnasium, where folding chairs had been arranged in a large circle and families were already gathering. She spotted Ethan and Mia immediately. Mia was talking animatedly with another girl, Emma, presumably, while Ethan chatted with a woman in her 40s who was signing as she spoke. When Mia saw Lana, she broke away from her conversation and ran over, her enthusiasm undimmed by the formal setting. "You came!" "Emma, this is Lena. She has 2 cats named Simon and Schuster, and she's a graphic designer and she's deaf like us." Emma, a tiny girl with glasses and hearing aids even larger than Mia's, studied Lena with interest. "Do your cats really sleep in the sink?" "Schuster does. Simon prefers the clean laundry." Emma nodded as if this confirmed something important, and the 2 girls returned to their conversation, which seemed to involve ranking various animals by their coolness factor. Ethan appeared at Lena's elbow, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one, and she accepted it gratefully. "Welcome to chaos," he said, gesturing at the growing crowd. "Fair warning, this class gets loud. Well, loud in the visual sense. Lots of hands moving, lots of energy." "I think I can handle it." The class was led by a deaf man in his 60s named Martin, who had the kind of commanding presence that suggested he'd been teaching for decades. He opened with introductions, asking each family to share why they were there. The answers varied: parents of newly diagnosed children, teenagers learning to communicate with deaf siblings, adults who'd lost their hearing later in life and were rebuilding their understanding of language. When it was Lena's turn, she felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes and tried not to let it paralyze her. "I'm Lena. I was born deaf. I'm here because a friend invited me, and I realized I've spent a long time avoiding spaces like this." Martin's eyebrows rose, and he signed back with the casual authority of someone who'd seen countless variations of her story. "Avoiding or protecting yourself?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Lena's carefully constructed explanations. "Maybe both." "That's honest. I appreciate honesty." Martin moved on to the next person, but Lena felt the question settle into her bones, demanding an answer she wasn't ready to give. The class itself was a revelation. They worked through practical scenarios, ordering food, asking for help, explaining needs to service workers, but underneath the lessons ran a current of shared experience. These people understood the exhaustion of constant translation, the frustration of being dismissed or patronized, the small daily violence of a world that treated accommodation as a favor rather than a right. During a break, Lena found herself in conversation with Emma's mother, a lawyer named Patricia who'd learned ASL when her daughter was diagnosed at age 5. "It's been 3 years and I'm still learning," Patricia said, her signs fluid but accented, marked by the patterns of spoken English. "But Emma's teaching me that this isn't a limitation. It's just a different way of being in the world." "Does she struggle?" Lena asked, watching Emma and Mia across the room, their hands flying as they laughed at some shared joke. "With other kids, I mean. Kids who don't sign." "Sometimes. She came home crying last month because a boy at school said she was weird, but then she told me that weird just means different, and different can be good." Patricia's expression softened. "I think she believes it most days. I'm trying to believe it too." The words echoed in Lena's head long after the class ended, after she'd said goodbye to Ethan and Mia and driven home through darkened streets. Simon and Schuster greeted her with their usual demands for attention, and she gathered them both into her lap on the couch, stroking their fur while she processed everything she'd witnessed. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name appeared with a photo attachment, Mia holding up a drawing she'd made during the class's free period. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, surrounded by what appeared to be dozens of cats. Above them, in careful letters, Mia had written, "My friends." Lena's vision blurred and she blinked rapidly, refusing to cry over a child's drawing. But the image had lodged itself somewhere behind her ribs, in the space where hope lived when she let it. "Mia wants to know if the cats are anatomically accurate," Ethan's text read. "I told her artistic license is a thing, but she's a perfectionist." "Tell her they're perfect," Lena typed back. "And tell her I said thank you. She says you're welcome. And also, can we go to the botanical gardens on Saturday? She wants to see the butterfly conservatory." Lena looked at the drawing again, at those 3 stick figures holding hands. She thought about Marcus and his cruelty, about all the years she'd spent believing his assessment was correct, that she was too much trouble, too complicated, too different to deserve uncomplicated affection. Then she thought about Mia's notebook full of cat questions and Ethan's quiet defense and Patricia's daughter who believed weird just meant different. "Saturday works," she wrote. "I'll meet you there at 10. The response came immediately, a thumbs-up emoji followed by a cat emoji, followed by what appeared to be a butterfly. Lena fell asleep on the couch with her phone in her hand and both cats pressed against her sides. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't dream about being invisible. She dreamed about botanical gardens and children's laughter and hands that spoke without sound, building bridges across silence. Saturday morning dawned gray and threatening rain, but the forecast promised the weather would hold until afternoon. Lena arrived at the botanical gardens to find Ethan and Mia already waiting by the entrance, Mia practically bouncing with anticipation. "They have blue morphos," Mia signed before Lena had even finished saying hello. "That's a kind of butterfly with wings like the sky. They're from Costa Rica. I read about them." "Then we definitely need to see them," Lena said, and Mia grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the conservatory entrance with Ethan following behind, his expression amused and indulgent. The conservatory was a climate-controlled paradise, humid and warm, with a winding path that took them through different ecosystems. Butterflies drifted past like flying flowers, landing on leaves and shoulders with democratic indifference. Mia was entranced, stopping every few feet to point out new species, consulting a guide she'd brought, and comparing the real butterflies to their photographs. Ethan and Lena trailed behind, letting Mia set the pace. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching Mia dart from flower to flower, her face lit with wonder every time a butterfly landed near enough to touch. "She's going to be okay," Ethan said suddenly, quietly. "Isn't she? When she can't hear anymore. She's going to be okay." Lena heard the fear underneath the question, the desperate need for reassurance that his daughter wouldn't suffer the way he imagined she might. She wanted to tell him, yes, absolutely, without question, but she'd learned that easy comfort was often just another form of lying. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some days will be hard. People will be cruel sometimes, or thoughtless, or just exhausted by having to accommodate her. She'll feel left out and frustrated and angry that her body doesn't work the way other people's do." Ethan's face fell, and Lena reached out, touching his arm gently. "But she'll also be okay," she continued, "because she has you, because she's learning ASL while she's young, because she's building a community of people who understand, because she's tough and smart, and she doesn't apologize for taking up space." Lena paused, watching Mia crouch beside a patch of flowers, signing to herself as she observed a monarch butterfly. "And because she's learning now that being different doesn't mean being less. That's the gift you're giving her. That's what will carry her through the hard days." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his daughter. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you. For being honest. For being here. Where else would I be?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. It wasn't pity or careful politeness. It was recognition, the kind that came from seeing someone fully and choosing to stay anyway. "Lena," he started, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. "Can I ask you something? And you can absolutely say no, or tell me I'm overstepping, or just ask." That night in the cafe, when Marcus said those things, you looked like you believed him, like some part of you thought he was right. Ethan's hands were moving now, signing even as he spoke, as if he needed both languages to express what he meant. "Do you still believe that?" The question was too large for the humid air of the conservatory, too intimate for a Saturday morning among butterflies. But Ethan was watching her with those patient eyes, waiting, and Lena found she didn't want to lie. "Sometimes," she admitted, "on bad days, when I'm tired of explaining myself, when I've spent too long trying to fit into spaces that weren't built for me, sometimes I think it would be easier if I were different, less complicated." "Easier for who?" "For everyone. For the people who have to deal with me." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That's not fair to you. You're not a burden to be dealt with. You're a person with needs, same as everyone else. The fact that your needs require accommodation doesn't make them less valid." That's easy to say, Lena said, more sharply than she intended. Harder to believe when you've spent your whole life being treated like an inconvenience. I know. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. I'm watching it happen to my daughter. I see the way people's faces change when they notice her hearing aids, the way they talk louder and slower, like she's stupid instead of deaf. It enrages me every single time. But it's different for you, Lena said. You're not the one they're pitying. No, I'm just the one who has to watch someone I love be diminished by people who should know better. Ethan turned to face her fully. And I'm learning that being adjacent to marginalization doesn't make me special or give me some kind of moral high ground. It just means I have a responsibility to do better, to make space, to listen when people tell me what they need. Ahead of them, Mia was gesturing excitedly at something in the foliage. They started walking again, closing the distance she'd created in her enthusiasm. You're a good father, Lena said quietly. I'm trying to be. Most days I feel like I'm failing. That's probably the sign you're doing it right. They found Mia crouched beside a bench, watching a blue morpho butterfly rest on a leaf, its wings slowly opening and closing to reveal that impossible blue, bright as summer sky. Look, Mia signed, her movement small and careful as if afraid to disturb the butterfly. Isn't it beautiful? It's perfect, Lena signed back, and she wasn't entirely sure she was talking about the butterfly. They spent another hour in the conservatory until Mia had seen every species twice and filled several pages of her notebook with observations. When they finally emerged into the cloudy afternoon, Lena felt lighter somehow, as if she'd left something heavy behind among the flowers and wings. Lunch? Ethan suggested. There's a good sandwich place near here. Very vegetarian-friendly, if that's relevant. It is relevant, actually. How did you know? You ordered a veggie omelet last week, and your face when Mia described bacon was pretty revealing. Lena laughed, surprised by his observation. People so rarely paid that kind of attention. Lunch sounds good. The sandwich shop was small and crowded, but they found a table by the window. Mia ordered grilled cheese and proceeded to disassemble it into its component parts, eating each element separately with the focused intensity she brought to all tasks. Ethan and Lena traded sections of the newspaper that someone had left behind, comfortable in the silence punctuated by Mia's occasional observations. It felt domestic in a way that should have been alarming. Lena barely knew these people, had been in their lives for less than 2 weeks, but sitting across from Ethan while Mia explained the structural integrity of cheese to no one in particular. Lena felt something she'd almost forgotten: belonging. The uncomplicated kind, where you didn't have to explain yourself or apologize for existing. When they finally parted ways in the parking lot, Mia hugged Lena goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of a child who hadn't learned yet to be guarded. Ethan signed his own goodbye, adding, "Same time next week?" "Next week," Lena confirmed, and she meant it. The weeks folded into each other with a rhythm Lena hadn't experienced before, each Saturday morning arriving like a gift she hadn't known she was allowed to want. There were trips to the Science Museum where Mia spent an entire afternoon programming a robot to move in increasingly complicated patterns, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, while Ethan and Lena traded amused glances over her bent head. There were afternoons at the park where autumn leaves crunched underfoot, and Mia collected the most colorful ones in a paper bag, sorting them later by shade and shape with the methodical precision she applied to everything. There were quiet evenings at Ethan's house where Lena found herself folded into their routine so naturally, it felt like she'd always been there, helping Mia with homework while Ethan cooked dinner, the three of them communicating in a blend of sign and speech that felt like its own language. It was during one of these evenings, a Thursday in late October when the first real cold snap had settled over the city, that everything shifted. Lena had arrived at Ethan's house straight from the ASL class, her hands still warm from an hour of animated conversation with Patricia and Martin about the politics of captioning in movie theaters. Ethan had greeted her at the door with flour on his shirt and an apologetic smile. "Fair warning, I'm attempting homemade pizza and it's going about as well as you'd expect," he'd said, leading her into a kitchen that looked like a bread explosion had occurred. Mia sat at the table, supposedly doing math homework, but actually building an elaborate tower out of pizza dough scraps. "I can help," Lena offered, washing her hands at the sink while surveying the chaos. I make a decent pizza. My grandmother's recipe. You're hired. Mia, stop engineering with the dough and finish your multiplication tables. Mia sighed dramatically, but returned to her homework, and Lena set about salvaging Ethan's pizza attempt. They worked side by side at the counter, their movements developing an easy choreography as Lena rolled out dough and Ethan chopped vegetables. The kitchen was warm and smelled of yeast and tomatoes, and through the window the early evening sky was turning that particular shade of blue that only appeared in autumn. "How was class?" Ethan asked, his hands busy with a bell pepper, but his attention focused on her face, making sure she could see his lips. "Good. Martin started a unit on deaf culture and history. Did you know there was a time when sign language was actually banned in deaf schools? Teachers tied children's hands behind their backs to force them to speak." Ethan's knife stilled. "That's barbaric." It was considered progressive, helping deaf children integrate into hearing society. Lena spread sauce across the dough with more force than necessary, old anger rising up. "The idea was that signing would make us lazy, that we'd never learn to function in the real world if we had access to our own language." The real world being the hearing world. Exactly, as if our world wasn't just as real. Lena looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sorry, Martin got me fired up about this. It's easy to forget sometimes that the way things are now, accommodation laws, ASL interpreters, captioning, all of that was fought for. People who came before me had to fight just to use their hands to communicate. Don't apologize, it's important." Ethan set down his knife and turned to face her fully. "And it's something I'm trying to learn about. For Mia. I want her to understand that being deaf isn't a deficit. It's a different way of experiencing the world, and there's a whole culture and community that comes with it." "You're already doing that," Lena said quietly, "just by learning to sign with her, by taking her to those classes, by not treating her hearing loss like a tragedy, to be mourned." "Sometimes it feels like a tragedy." The words came out raw, unguarded. "Sometimes I watch her struggle to hear something or see other kids exclude her because she's different, and I want to rage at the universe for doing this to her." "That's normal. You're allowed to grieve. But she shouldn't have to see that grief. She shouldn't grow up thinking her father views her as broken." Lena reached out and touched his arm, flour dusting both their hands. "She won't. Trust me. She sees how much you love her. How hard you're working to build a world where she can thrive. That's what matters." Ethan covered her hand with his own, and the kitchen seemed to shrink around them, the space between their bodies charged with something Lena didn't want to name yet. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so small it might have been accidental, if not for the way his eyes held hers. "Dad, I'm done with my homework," Mia announced from the table, her voice cutting through the moment like scissors through thread. "Can I help with the pizza now?" They sprang apart, both suddenly very interested in their respective tasks. Lena felt heat climbing her neck that had nothing to do with the oven's warmth. Ethan cleared his throat and gestured for Mia to join them, and the three of them finished assembling the pizza together. Mia carefully arranging pepperoni in a spiral pattern she'd apparently seen in a geometry video. Dinner was chaotic and perfect. The pizza slightly burnt on one edge, but delicious anyway. Mia's spiral pattern surviving mostly intact. They ate in the living room, plates balanced on laps while an animated movie played with captions running across the bottom of the screen. Mia curled up between them on the couch, her head eventually drooping onto Lena's shoulder as exhaustion claimed her. "She's out," Ethan whispered, signing the words as he spoke. "Bedtime was 20 minutes ago." "Should we wake her?" "Probably." But neither of them moved. They sat there in the flickering light of the television, Mia warm and heavy between them, and Lena felt something settle in her chest that she'd been missing without knowing it. This was what family looked like when it worked, this quiet contentment, this easy togetherness. Eventually, Ethan did carry Mia to bed, leaving Lena alone in the living room with the movie still playing silently on the screen. She should probably go home. It was getting late, and she had a client meeting in the morning. But when Ethan returned, settling back onto the couch beside her, she found she didn't want to leave. "Thank you for dinner," he said, "and for saving my pizza disaster, and for—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "For being here, for being part of this." I like being part of this. Yeah? Something hopeful flickered across his face. Because I was thinking, and you can absolutely say no to this, but next Saturday is Mia's birthday. We're doing a small party at the house, just a few kids from school and the ASL class. And I was wondering if you'd want to come, as a guest, not as entertainment or anything, just as someone who matters to us. The invitation landed with unexpected weight. A birthday party meant meeting Mia's friends, being introduced as a presence in her life significant enough to include in milestone celebrations. It meant commitment, visibility, stepping into a role Lena had spent years avoiding. "I'd love to come," she heard herself say, and Ethan's smile made her brave. "What is Mia like? For presents, I mean. Books about animals, art supplies, anything purple? She's very consistent in her preferences." They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything, their conversation wandering through easy topics before circling back to deeper ones. Ethan told her about his ex-wife, about the slow dissolution of their marriage once Mia's diagnosis made it clear their family wouldn't look the way Sarah had envisioned. Lena told him about her parents, about their well-meaning but suffocating concern, their inability to see her as anything other than their disabled daughter who needed protecting. "They still call every day to check on me," Lena admitted, "like I'm going to fall apart if left unsupervised for too long." "Do you ever tell them to stop?" "I tried once. They got so hurt that I backed down. It was easier to just accept the calls." "Easier for them, you mean?" Lena blinked, the observation landing like a stone in still water. "I never thought about it that way." "People who love us can still hurt us," Ethan said quietly. "Even with the best intentions, sometimes especially with the best intentions." It was past midnight when Lena finally left, stepping out into air so cold it burned her lungs. Ethan walked her to her car, his hands shoved in his pockets against the chill. At her driver's side door he paused, and Lena turned to find him watching her with that expression she was starting to recognize, the one that made her feel seen in ways that were both terrifying and essential. "Lena," he started, then seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. Instead, he signed, his hands careful and deliberate in the dim light from the street lamp. "I'm glad you came into our lives, both of us. We're better for knowing you." The words settled into her chest like warmth, like safety. She signed back, "You've given me something I didn't know I was allowed to want. Thank you for that." She drove home with her radio silent, preferring the quiet to the vibrations of music she could only partially hear. The streets were empty at this hour, traffic lights blinking yellow at deserted intersections. In her mind, she replayed the evening, the flour-dusted kitchen, Mia's sleepy weight against her shoulder, Ethan's thumb across her knuckles, small moments that added up to something larger than their individual parts. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of cold November sunshine that made everything look sharp-edged and beautiful. Lena showed up at Ethan's house with a gift bag containing 3 books about marine biology. Mia had recently announced her intention to study whales, and a set of watercolor paints in every shade of purple she could find. The house was already full of noise and energy when she arrived, children running between rooms in the chaotic way of 8-year-olds freed from adult supervision. Ethan answered the door looking slightly frazzled but happy, a party hat perched crookedly on his head. "Reinforcements have arrived," he said, pulling her inside. "Fair warning, it's madness in here. Emma brought her little brother who's allergic to everything, and one of Mia's school friends doesn't sign, so we're doing a lot of translation. And I think someone may have already broken a lamp, but I'm choosing to deal with that later." Lena laughed and let him steer her into the chaos. The living room had been decorated with streamers and balloons, all in various shades of purple. A table along one wall held pizza boxes and an elaborate cake shaped like a whale, blue frosting waves cresting around its sides. Children clustered in groups, some signing, some speaking, some doing both simultaneously in the fluid way of kids who hadn't yet learned that languages were supposed to stay separate. Mia spotted her immediately and came running over, her birthday crown sliding sideways on her head. "You came! Did you bring Simon and Schuster? They're not great at parties, but I brought you something else." Lena handed over the gift bag, and Mia tore into it with enthusiasm, her eyes going wide when she saw the books. "Whales! Dad, look, whale books!" She held them up for Ethan to admire, already flipping through the pages. This one has humpback songs represented as visual patterns. That's so cool. What do you say? Ethan prompted. Mia flung her arms around Lena's waist. Thank you. These are perfect. The party was beautiful chaos. They played games that required no hearing, charades acted out entirely in ASL, a scavenger hunt with visual clues, musical chairs modified so that the music played through a speaker with heavy bass that the kids could feel through the floor. Lena found herself helping Patricia manage the food table, while Emma's mother, a quiet woman named Jennifer, kept the games organized. The children moved between communication styles with the ease of natives, signing to each other one moment and shouting the next, treating both languages as equally valid tools. At one point, Lena noticed a boy standing alone by the window watching the other children with the kind of careful distance that suggested he didn't quite know how to join in. She recognized him from Mia's school, one of the hearing kids, the one Ethan had mentioned who didn't sign. She approached carefully, making sure he could see her before she spoke. Hi, I'm Lena. You're in Mia's class, right? The boy nodded, his eyes darting to her hearing aids, then quickly away. I'm Tyler. I don't really know anyone here. That's okay. Birthday parties can be overwhelming, especially when everyone's doing that. He gestured vaguely at a group of kids signing rapidly to each other, their hands flying. I don't understand what they're saying. Do you want to learn? Lena asked gently. I could teach you a few signs, easy ones. Tyler considered this, curiosity winning out over uncertainty. Okay. For the next 15 minutes, Lena taught him basic signs. Hello, thank you, friend, happy birthday. Tyler practiced with the focused intensity of a child determined to get something right, his fingers forming the shapes carefully. When Mia came over to check on them, Tyler signed happy birthday with only minimal hesitation, and Mia's face lit up. You're learning, she signed, then caught herself and spoke aloud. That's awesome, Tyler. Lena's teaching me. Can you show me more? And just like that, the barrier dissolved. Mia and Tyler settled onto the floor with a book of ASL signs, working through it together while Lena watched with something warm unfurling in her chest. This was what inclusion looked like when it worked. Not special accommodations or separate spaces, but simply people making the effort to understand each other. Ethan appeared beside her, 2 cups of punch in hand. He offered her one and nodded toward the kids. You're good with them. I just taught him a few signs. You did more than that. You made him feel included. That matters. They stood together watching the party unfold around them. Through the window, the November sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Someone had turned on music, and a few kids were dancing, feeling the bass through the floor, their movements unself-conscious and joyful. This is a good party, Lena said. It's better because you're here. Ethan's voice was quiet, meant just for her. Everything's better when you're here. Lena turned to look at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. This wasn't casual friendship or simple gratitude. This was something deeper, more complicated, the kind of feeling that came with risks she'd spent years avoiding. Ethan, she started, but whatever she'd been about to say was interrupted by Mia calling for them to come sing happy birthday. They gathered around the whale cake, Patricia holding her phone up to record while everyone sang. The hearing kids sang aloud while the deaf kids signed the song, hands moving in synchronized waves. Mia stood at the center of it all, her face glowing in the light from 8 candles, and when she closed her eyes to make a wish, Lena found herself wishing too. For this to last. For this feeling of belonging to not be temporary. For the courage to believe she deserved it. The party wound down as the afternoon faded into evening. Parents arrived to collect their children, and the house slowly emptied until it was just Lena, Ethan, and Mia, surrounded by crumpled wrapping paper and half-eaten cake. Mia, exhausted from excitement, had fallen asleep on the couch clutching one of her new whale books. I should go, Lena said quietly, not wanting to disturb her. Let you get her to bed properly. Stay, Ethan said, then seemed to hear how it sounded. I mean, help me clean up? It'll go faster with 2 people. They worked in comfortable silence, gathering plates and cups, folding up streamers, restoring order to the chaos. The kitchen was warm and lit with soft overhead light, and Lana felt the same domestic contentment she'd experienced that night with the pizza. This ease of working alongside someone who didn't require constant explanation, who understood her rhythms and accommodated them without making it feel like accommodation. "Today was perfect," she said, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "Mia looked so happy." She is. You made her birthday special." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every movement. "Lena, can I ask you something? You're asking permission to ask questions now? This one feels important." He crossed the small distance between them, and suddenly the kitchen felt very small. "What are we doing here?" Lena's hand stilled on the glass she was holding. "What do you mean?" Us. These Saturdays that have turned into Thursdays and random weeknight dinners. The way Mia talks about you like you're already part of the family. The way I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "The way I look forward to seeing you more than I've looked forward to anything in years." The confession hung between them, fragile and brave. Lena set down the glass carefully, buying herself time to think. This was the moment where she should be cautious, where years of self-protection should kick in and remind her of all the ways this could go wrong. But looking at Ethan, at the hope and fear warring in his expression, all she could think about was how tired she was of being careful. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted. "I just know that I'm happy when I'm here, that being with you and Mia feels like coming home, that I've spent so long keeping people at a distance, and I don't want to do that with you." "No?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "No." She stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could count the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I want to see where this goes. I want to stop being afraid." "I'm afraid too," Ethan confessed, "of messing this up, of hurting you, of Mia getting attached, and then—" Lena reached up and placed her fingers against his lips, stopping the litany of fears. "We could list everything that might go wrong, or we could be brave enough to see what goes right." Ethan caught her hand, holding it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, rapid and strong. "Brave. Okay, I can try brave." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Lena tilted her face up to meet him. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, and she answered by pressing closer, her free hand finding the back of his neck. He tasted like birthday cake and possibility, and when he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Was that okay?" he asked, signing the question as well, and Lena loved him a little bit for that automatic inclusion. "That was better than okay." "Can I do it again?" Instead of answering, she kissed him, and this time there was less hesitation, more certainty. His arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and she let herself lean into him, let herself believe that this was allowed, that she could have this. When they finally broke apart, both slightly dazed, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "So, we're doing this? Actually doing this?" "I think we've been doing this for a while. We're just naming it now." "I like naming things." He pressed a kiss to her temple, then her cheek, then found her lips again. "Hi, I'm Ethan, and I'm dating an incredible woman who makes my daughter laugh and challenges me to be better, and kisses like—" Lena laughed and covered his mouth with her hand. "Mia's literally in the next room." "Mia's asleep." "Mia has selective hearing. Trust me on this." As if summoned, a small voice called from the living room. "Dad, is Lena still here?" They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents, both fighting smiles. Ethan called back, "Yeah, sweetheart, we're just cleaning up. Go back to sleep." "Can Lena stay for breakfast? Tomorrow is Sunday. We always have pancakes on Sunday." Ethan looked at Lena, the question clear in his eyes. She thought about her empty apartment, about Simon and Schuster, who would forgive her absence if fed on time, about all the Sunday mornings she'd spent alone. Then she thought about pancakes and purple birthday crowns, and the way Mia said her name like it was something precious. "I can stay," she called back, "if that's okay with your dad." "It's very okay with me," Ethan said quietly, "just for her." From the living room came a sleepy but triumphant "Yes!" followed by the sound of Mia burrowing back into the couch cushions. They finished cleaning in a different kind of silence now, one charged with awareness and new possibility. Every time they passed each other, their hands would brush, their eyes would catch. Small confirmations that this was real, this was happening. When the kitchen was finally clean, Ethan found spare blankets and pillows, and they made up the guest room that Lena had never used before but suddenly felt like hers. "I'll be right down the hall," Ethan said at her door, and there was a question in the way he said it, an invitation he was leaving open. "Good," Lena said. "Close enough to find, but far enough to keep things appropriate with an 8-year-old in the house. Very responsible of us. We're very responsible people. The most responsible." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "Good night, Lena." "Good night, Ethan." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. Through the walls, she could hear the sounds of Ethan moving around his room, the old house settling into nighttime quiet. She thought about Marcus, about that terrible night in the cafe that had felt like an ending. But it had been a beginning, just not the one she'd expected. Lena changed into the t-shirt Ethan had lent her and climbed into a bed that smelled like lavender detergent and felt like safety. Tomorrow, there would be pancakes and probably questions from Mia that would require delicate answering. There would be conversations about what this meant and where they were going and all the practical complications of building something real. But tonight, she let herself simply be happy. Simply be here, in this house, with these people who had chosen her not despite her differences but including them. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, and she dreamed of breakfast and possibility and a future that felt, for the first time in years, like something she was allowed to want. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains, and for a disoriented moment, Lena forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a warm rush, the birthday party, the kiss in the kitchen, Ethan's gentle goodnight. She lay still beneath borrowed blankets, listening to the house wake up around her. Footsteps creaked overhead, water ran through old pipes, and somewhere downstairs a cabinet door closed with a soft thud. She found her phone on the nightstand. 7:30, which meant she'd slept later than usual, lulled by the unfamiliar comfort of not being alone. There were 3 texts from Rachel demanding details about where she'd disappeared to, one from her mother with her daily check-in, and a photo from Ethan sent 20 minutes ago. Mia at the kitchen table, already dressed, holding a sign she'd made that read, "Pancake Chef Lena, report to kitchen immediately," decorated with drawings of cats and whales. Lena smiled and typed back, "On my way. Tell the chef I take my orders seriously." She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, finger-combed her hair into something presentable, and made her way downstairs following the smell of coffee and the sound of Mia's voice explaining something with great intensity. The kitchen was bright with morning light, Ethan standing at the stove with a spatula, while Mia sat on the counter beside him, apparently lecturing about the proper ratio of chocolate chips to batter. 3 chips per spoonful is scientifically proven to be optimal, Mia was saying with absolute conviction. "I read it in a study." "What study?" Ethan asked, amused. "A study I did last week. Very scientific." "Your study involved eating 12 pancakes in one sitting. Like I said, very scientific." Lena leaned against the door frame, content to watch them for a moment. This was what she'd been missing all these years. Not just romance or connection, but this easy domestic joy, the simple pleasure of being part of someone else's morning routine. Ethan looked up and caught her watching, and his whole face softened into a smile that made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said, signing it as well. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months." She crossed to the counter where Mia immediately handed her the sign she'd made. "Do you accept your position as assistant pancake chef?" Mia asked solemnly. "I accept with great honor." Lena signed back, matching Mia's serious tone. "What are my duties?" "Chocolate chip distribution. Dad always puts too few. It's a tragedy." "A tragedy that will be rectified immediately." Lena washed her hands and joined Ethan at the stove, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the way his arm brushed against hers as he poured batter onto the griddle. He glanced at her sideways, his expression warm and slightly shy, and she realized they were both navigating new territory here, trying to figure out how to be around each other with Mia watching. They made pancakes together, a messy collaborative effort that resulted in several slightly burnt attempts, and one that somehow ended up shaped like a deformed octopus. Mia declared that one her favorite and insisted on eating it first, documenting it extensively with her phone before taking a single bite. For science, she explained, and also so Emma knows I had a cooler breakfast than her boring cereal. They ate at the kitchen table, syrup and butter making everything sticky, conversation flowing easily between bites. Mia recounted her favorite moments from the party with the detailed enthusiasm of someone who'd taken mental notes specifically for this retelling. Ethan added editorial comments that made Mia roll her eyes with exaggerated patience, and Lena sat there, soaking it all in, committing every detail to memory because she wanted to remember this morning forever. When breakfast was finished and the dishes cleared, Mia announced she needed to finish her whale book immediately and disappeared upstairs, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the sudden quiet. "So," Ethan said, refilling their coffee cups. "That happened. Last night." "It did." Lena accepted the coffee, warming her hands on the mug. "Do you regret it?" "Not even a little bit. You?" "No, but I'm terrified." Ethan sat down across from her, his expression open and honest. "Me too. I haven't dated anyone since Sarah left. Haven't wanted to. And now here you are, and I want—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I want things I thought I'd given up on. Partnership. Connection. Someone to share the small moments with, not just the big ones." "I want that too," Lena admitted. "But I've spent so long protecting myself, expecting people to leave eventually. I don't know how to not do that. We could learn together. Take it slow. See where it goes without putting pressure on it to be anything specific yet." "Slow sounds good. Safe. Though I should probably mention that Mia is going to have opinions. About us. About what this means." Ethan smiled ruefully. "She's not exactly subtle." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mia appeared in the doorway, her whale book clutched to her chest. She looked between them with the shrewd assessment of a child who missed nothing. "Are you two dating now?" she asked bluntly. "Because that would be cool, just so you know." Lena felt heat climb her neck, but Ethan handled it with the practiced ease of a parent who'd fielded difficult questions before. "We're figuring that out," he said honestly. "How would you feel about it if we were?" Mia considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I'd feel good. Lena makes you smile more. And she's nice to me, but not in that fake way some of your work friends are when they come over and pretend to care about my projects." "My work friends are not that bad," Ethan protested. "Jennifer asked me if I was excited about learning to talk with my hands, like it was a party trick." Mia made air quotes with impressive disdain. "Lena treats signing like a real language." "Because it is." "It absolutely is," Lena said, moved by Mia's fierce defense of something so fundamental to her identity. "And for what it's worth, I think you're pretty great too, dating your dad or not." Mia beamed. "Can we go to the aquarium today? They have a new beluga exhibit, and I need to see it for research." "Research for what?" Ethan asked suspiciously. "My future career as a marine biologist. Obviously." They went to the aquarium, the three of them bundled against the December cold that had settled over the city overnight. The aquarium was crowded with weekend families, children pressing their faces against glass tanks, while parents took photos and tried to maintain some semblance of control. Mia led them through the exhibits with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the map, pausing at each tank to share facts she'd accumulated from extensive reading. "Beluga whales can change the shape of their heads," she announced at the beluga tank, signing as she spoke so Lena could follow easily. "They use it for echolocation, and they're called sea canaries because they're so vocal." They stood there watching the white whales glide through blue water, their movements graceful and alien. One swam close to the glass and seemed to make eye contact with Mia, who pressed her hand against the barrier in greeting. The whale hovered there for a long moment before swimming away, and Mia turned to them with shining eyes. "Did you see that? It looked right at me." "It recognized a fellow intellectual," Ethan said, and Mia giggled. They wandered through the rest of the exhibits, Ethan and Lena trailing behind Mia's enthusiasm, their hands occasionally brushing as they walked. At one point, waiting while Mia examined a touch tank with the patient attention of a scientist at work, Ethan reached over and laced his fingers through Lena's. The gesture was simple, easy, and it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the aquarium's heating system. "Is this okay?" he asked quietly, and she squeezed his hand in answer. They stopped for lunch at the Aquarium Cafe, claiming a table near the windows that overlooked the harbor. Mia ordered fish and chips with what she claimed was supreme irony, then spent 10 minutes explaining to a bemused server why eating fish at an aquarium was both hilarious and slightly tragic. She's going to be a handful as a teenager, Lena observed after the server escaped. She's a handful now, Ethan said fondly. I'm just trying to make sure she channels it into productive civil disobedience rather than the destructive kind. Aim high. Always. He looked at her over his coffee cup, his expression growing serious. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's too soon or too personal. Ask. What made you say yes to this, to us, after everything with Marcus, after years of protecting yourself? What changed? Lena watched Mia through the window, signing to herself as she observed the seagulls fighting over dropped French fries. She thought about that night in the cafe, about the humiliation that had felt like an ending, about Ethan stepping forward when he didn't have to, about Mia's chocolate-covered grin and the way they'd made space for her without her having to ask. You saw me, she said finally. Not just the deaf thing, not just the disability. You saw me being hurt and you cared enough to do something about it. And then you kept seeing me, kept choosing to include me. You made me remember that I'm allowed to want things. Connection, belonging, love, maybe if I'm brave enough. You're one of the bravest people I know. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Brave isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. And you're doing the thing, showing up, letting us in. That takes courage. Before Lena could respond, Mia returned to the table with a pressed penny from the machine near the bathrooms. She'd chosen the design of a sea turtle, and she presented it to Lena with great ceremony. For you, she signed. Because you came to the aquarium with us, and because sea turtles are wise and calm, and I think that's like you. Lena accepted the penny, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you. I'll keep it safe. You better. It cost 2 quarters and a penny to make. That's significant money. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the aquarium, taking their time, letting Mia set the pace. When they finally left, the sun was already setting, painting the harbor in shades of orange and gold. Mia fell asleep in the car on the drive back, exhausted from excitement and sugar, leaving Ethan and Lena to navigate the quiet city streets in comfortable silence. Do you want to come in? Ethan asked when they reached his house. I was thinking maybe we could watch a movie after Mia's in bed. Something mindless with good captions. I should probably go home. Feed my cats, check my email, pretend to be a responsible adult. Right, of course. He tried to hide his disappointment and failed completely. But I could come back, after, if the invitation's still open. Ethan's face brightened. The invitation is extremely open. Lena drove home through darkening streets, her mind full of the day's small perfections. Mia's enthusiasm, Ethan's hand in hers, the pressed penny warm in her pocket. Her apartment felt too quiet when she let herself in, though Simon & Schuster provided their usual chaotic greeting. She fed them and checked her email and changed into comfortable clothes, moving through her routine on autopilot while her thoughts stayed anchored to that house across town. Rachel called while Lena was deciding whether to bring anything back to Ethan's. Okay, I've been patient for like 12 whole hours, Rachel said without preamble. Where were you last night, and why do you sound different? I sound the same as always. No, you sound happy. It's weird. What happened? Lena settled onto her couch, Simon immediately claiming her lap. You know that guy from the cafe, Ethan? The one who rescued you from Nightmare Marcus? What about him? We're dating, I think. We're definitely something. Rachel shrieked so loudly that Lena had to hold the phone away from her ear. Details! I need all the details immediately. Lena found herself recounting the past few weeks. The Saturday mornings, the ASL class, Mia's birthday party, the kiss that had changed everything. Rachel listened with increasingly excited interjections, demanding clarifications and specifics with the intensity of someone living vicariously through her friend's romance. This is perfect, Rachel declared when Lena had finished. You deserve this. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. It's early, Lena cautioned. We're taking it slow. You spent the night at his house and had breakfast with his kid. That's not slow, that's domestic. We're taking it domestic slow, Rachel laughed. Whatever you want to call it, I'm happy for you, genuinely. You've been hiding for so long, it's good to see you taking a chance on something real. After they hung up, Lena sat for a while in her quiet apartment, processing the conversation. Rachel was right. She had been hiding, building walls and calling it self-protection, avoiding risk and calling it wisdom. But Ethan and Mia had somehow slipped past her defenses, and instead of feeling exposed, she felt found. She drove back to Ethan's house as the last light faded from the sky. He answered the door in sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt, his hair still damp from the shower, and something in Lena's chest went soft at the casual intimacy of it. "You came back," he said, smiling. "I said I would. People say things they don't always mean. I meant it." She stepped inside, the house warm and welcoming around them. "Where's Mia?" "Asleep. She crashed about 20 minutes ago. The aquarium completely exhausted her." He led her to the living room where he'd clearly been setting up for a movie night. Blankets on the couch, 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table, the TV cued to what looked like a nature documentary. "Very romantic," Lena teased. "Nature documentaries. I figured we could use something that doesn't require much brain power, and the captions are excellent. Plus, whales. Mia's influence is pervasive." They settled onto the couch, close but not quite touching, both still navigating the newness of this. The documentary started, something about coral reefs narrated by a soothing British voice, and Lena found herself relaxing into the cushions, into Ethan's proximity, into the simple pleasure of not being alone. Halfway through the documentary, Ethan shifted and put his arm around her shoulders, and Lena leaned into him without thinking about it. They fit together easily, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder like it belonged there. His hand traced absent patterns on her arm, and she felt herself drifting in the peaceful space between waking and sleep. "Lena?" Ethan's voice was quiet, careful not to startle her. "Hmm?" "Thank you for giving this a chance, for giving us a chance." She tilted her head to look up at him, finding his face serious in the television's flickering light. "Thank you for making me want to." He kissed her then, soft and unhurried, and Lena let herself fall into it, let herself believe that this was allowed, that she could have this. When they broke apart, both breathing slightly harder, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling for you," he whispered. "Is that okay?" Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment where she should be careful, where she should protect herself against future hurt. But looking at Ethan, at the vulnerability in his eyes, all she wanted was to be brave enough to match it. "It's okay," she said, "because I'm falling too." They stayed like that, wrapped around each other on the couch, the documentary playing unwatched in the background. Outside, winter pressed against the windows, but inside there was warmth and safety and the beginning of something that felt like it might last. "Stay tonight," Ethan said eventually. The guest room is yours if you want it. I just don't want you driving home this late." "Okay," Lena agreed, and she meant it as more than just acceptance of a place to sleep. She meant it as yes to this, yes to them, yes to whatever they were building together. They eventually turned off the documentary and went upstairs, moving quietly so as not to wake Mia. At the guest room door, Ethan kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her ache. "Sleep well," he signed, and she signed it back. But sleep was a long time coming. Lena lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, and thought about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She'd gone from that humiliating night in the cafe to this, to belonging, to being chosen, to believing she deserved it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan, even though he was just down the hall. "I know you're probably asleep, but I wanted you to know I'm really glad you're here. In my house, in my life, just really glad." Lena smiled in the darkness and typed back, "I'm really glad too. Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Lena. Sweet dreams." She dreamed of aquariums and pressed pennies, of hands moving through water and air with equal fluidity, of a little girl with her father's eyes teaching the world that different didn't mean less. And when she woke in the morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of Mia singing off-key in the shower, she felt something she'd almost forgotten was possible. She felt home. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, a pattern of belonging that felt both new and ancient. Lena started keeping spare clothes at Ethan's house, a drawer in the guest room that slowly filled with her things. She met his friends, his colleagues, the other parents from Mia's school, and navigated the careful questions about who she was and what she meant to this small family. Some people were kind, others cautiously polite, a few openly confused about what Ethan saw in her. But Ethan never wavered, never treated her like a secret or something to be explained. She was simply his girlfriend and Mia's friend, and that was enough. The holidays arrived with their usual chaos, and Lena found herself absorbed into Ethan and Mia's traditions. They decorated the Christmas tree together, Mia insisting on arranging every ornament with mathematical precision, while Ethan and Lena traded amused glances. They baked cookies that turned out slightly burnt but delicious anyway. They drove through neighborhoods looking at light displays, Mia providing running commentary on which houses had clearly failed to understand proper aesthetic principles. On Christmas morning, Lena woke in the guest room to find a stocking hung on her doorknob, her name written across it in Mia's careful handwriting. Inside were small, thoughtful things, chocolate she loved, a new sketch pad, a book about graphic design history she'd mentioned wanting. At the bottom was a note in Ethan's writing, "You're part of this now. Merry Christmas." She cried, just a little, holding that stocking like the treasure it was. Then she went downstairs to find her small family waiting, and the day unfolded in warmth and laughter, and the kind of joy she'd stopped believing was meant for people like her. But it was a quiet moment in early January, when the decorations had come down and routine had reasserted itself, that everything crystallized for Lena. She was at Ethan's house, working on her laptop at the kitchen table, while Mia did homework beside her and Ethan prepared dinner. It was mundane, ordinary, completely unremarkable. And it was perfect. Mia looked up from her math problems and signed to Lena. "Can you help me with this? Dad's terrible at fractions." "I heard that," Ethan called from the stove. "You were supposed to," Mia signed back, grinning. Lena helped Mia work through the problem, their heads bent together over the textbook, and she realized with startling clarity that this was what she'd been missing all along. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but this, the small daily intimacy of being needed and wanted and included without having to earn it. She looked up to find Ethan watching them, his expression soft with affection, and something in her chest unlocked completely. She loved him. She loved his daughter. She loved this life they were building together, messy and complicated and absolutely real. And for the first time since that terrible night in the cafe, Lena believed with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The realization settled into Lena's bones over the following weeks. This bone-deep certainty that she'd found something worth keeping. But certainty didn't erase fear, and on a gray February afternoon when Ethan asked her to move in, Lena felt panic rise in her throat like floodwater. They were sitting in his living room, Mia at a friend's house for a rare sleepover, giving them one of those precious stretches of uninterrupted time that had become increasingly valuable. Ethan had made dinner, something complicated involving roasted vegetables and a sauce that had required 3 different pans. They'd eaten on the couch, plates balanced on their laps, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other well enough not to need constant conversation. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, setting his empty plate on the coffee table, "and you can absolutely say no to this, but I wanted to ask anyway." Lena felt her stomach tighten. Sentences that started that way rarely ended well. "Okay. You're here almost every night anyway. You have a drawer upstairs that's overflowing because you keep bringing more stuff. Simon and Schuster have basically colonized the guest room." He turned to face her fully, and Lena could see he was nervous, his hands fidgeting in a way they rarely did. "What if you just moved in? Officially. Made this your home too?" The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying. Lena's first instinct was to say yes immediately, to leap at this offer of permanence she'd spent her whole life believing wasn't meant for her. But hard on its heels came the familiar fear, the voice that whispered she was too much, that eventually Ethan would tire of the accommodations her presence required, that she should protect herself before it was too late. "That's a big step," she managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "It is. But we've been doing this for 4 months now, and it works. You work. Here, with us." Ethan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Mia asks me every week when you're going to officially move in. She wants to redecorate the guest room into a proper office for you. She's made sketches. Of course she has. Lena tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Ethan, You're scared. He said it gently, without judgment. I get it. This is fast. We can slow down if you need to. It's not about the speed. It's about... Lena stopped, trying to find words for the tangle of fear and hope in her chest. What happens when you get tired of it? Of me? When having a deaf girlfriend stops being novel and starts being inconvenient? Ethan's expression shifted, hurt flashing across his features before settling into something more complex. Is that what you think? That I'm with you because it's novel? No, maybe. I don't know. Lena pulled her hand away, needing space to think. I just know that people always say they don't mind at first. They make accommodations, they learn sign language, they promise it's not a big deal. And then 6 months in, or a year, or 2 years, they realize it actually is a big deal and I'm not worth the effort. I'm not those people. You say that now. Lena, look at me. Ethan waited until she met his eyes. I'm not asking you to move in despite your deafness. I'm asking you to move in because you're you, because you make me laugh, because you call me on my bullshit, because coming home to you is the best part of my day. Your deafness isn't something I'm tolerating. It's part of who you are, and I love who you are. The words should have been comforting, but they just made the fear sharper. You can't know that you'll always feel that way. You're right. I can't guarantee the future. Nobody can. Ethan leaned back against the couch, and Lena saw exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. But I can tell you that I've spent 4 months learning what it means to be with you. I know that sometimes you need me to face you when I talk. I know that crowded restaurants are difficult, and that you read lips like other people read expressions. I know that your hearing aids need batteries, and that sometimes the world is too loud, and sometimes it's too quiet, and none of that scares me, or frustrates me, or makes me love you less. You love me? Lena's voice came out small, uncertain. I love you. Ethan said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I have for a while now. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it, though this might not be it, given that you're currently planning your escape route. I'm not... Lena stopped because that was exactly what she was doing. Cataloging exits, building walls, preparing for the inevitable moment when this all fell apart. It was what she'd always done, her default mode of self-protection. But sitting here in Ethan's living room, watching him watch her with those patient eyes, she realized that protecting herself meant losing this, meant losing him. I'm terrified, she admitted, of believing this is real and then having it taken away, of letting myself need you and Mia and then ending up alone again. I'm terrified too, Ethan said, of screwing this up, of saying the wrong thing or forgetting to accommodate something important, of Mia getting hurt if this doesn't work out. He reached for her hand again, and this time Lena let him take it. But I'm more terrified of not trying, of letting fear keep us from something that could be extraordinary. Lena looked at their joined hands, at the way his fingers fit between hers like they'd been designed for exactly this purpose. She thought about the past 4 months, about all the small moments that had built this foundation between them. Ethan had never once made her feel like a burden. He'd learned to sign not because he had to, but because he wanted to communicate with her in her language. He'd made space for her in his life, in his home, in his daughter's heart, and he'd done it all without asking her to be anyone other than who she was. I love you too, she said quietly. I think I have since that night in the cafe when you signed to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's face transformed, hope and relief and joy chasing each other across his features. Yeah, and I'm sorry for panicking, for immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Don't apologize for being scared. Just talk to me about it. Let me in when the fear gets loud. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. We're building this together. That means you don't have to carry your fears alone anymore. Lena buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his laundry detergent and the coffee he'd spilled on his shirt earlier. I want to say yes to moving in. I want that so much it scares me. Then say yes. What if I'm not ready? Then we wait until you are. But Lena, he pulled back enough to look at her. You're already here. You're already part of this family. Making it official just means claiming the space you've already carved out for yourself. She thought about her apartment across town, about the guest room upstairs that had become more hers than guest-like, about Mia's sketches for her office and the drawer that kept overflowing with her things. Ethan was right. She'd been living here in everything but name, building a life that looked nothing like the solitary existence she'd maintained for years. "Okay," she said, and watched Ethan's eyes widen. "Yes, I'll move in. Officially." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Lena felt some of the fear ease as joy rushed in to fill the space. When they broke apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Mia's going to lose her mind. She's been planning your office design for weeks." "Of course she has," Lena laughed, the sound watery with emotions she couldn't quite name. "Should we tell her tonight?" "She's at Emma's until tomorrow morning, which means—" His smile turned mischievous. "We have the whole house to ourselves for the first time in months." "Is that so?" "That is very much so." They christened the decision properly, taking their time, learning each other without the usual awareness that Mia might wake up at any moment. Later, tangled together in Ethan's bed, their bed now, Lena supposed, she traced patterns on his chest and let herself imagine a future that didn't end in loss. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, his fingers running through her hair in slow, soothing strokes. "That I'm happy. That I didn't think I was allowed to be this happy." "You're allowed. You've always been allowed." "I'm starting to believe that." But moving her things took less time than Lena expected, mostly because she'd been gradually relocating her life to Ethan's house for months without fully acknowledging it. Her landlord was understanding when she broke her lease early, even wishing her luck with what he called her new adventure. Rachel helped pack, oscillating between tears and excited planning for how to redecorate Lena's old bedroom as a proper guest room in her own apartment. "I'm going to miss having you 5 minutes away," Rachel said, carefully wrapping Lena's collection of vintage coffee mugs in newspaper. "But I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. You've said that like 50 times today." "Because it's true, and I want you to hear it until you believe it." Rachel fixed her with a serious look. "You spent so long thinking you weren't enough. It's good to see you finally understanding that you're exactly enough." The hardest part was saying goodbye to the space where she'd built her careful, controlled life. Walking through the empty apartment one last time, Lena felt a complicated mix of relief and nostalgia. This had been her sanctuary, the place where she'd felt safe even if she'd also felt alone. But safety without connection was just another form of isolation, and she was ready to trade it for something messier and infinitely more real. Mia had indeed designed Lena's office with the meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything. The guest room had been transformed with a new desk positioned to catch the best natural light, shelves installed at precisely the right height for Lena's reference books, and a small gallery wall where Mia had hung some of Lena's favorite design work alongside her own drawings. "I consulted ergonomic studies about proper desk height and chair positioning," Mia explained seriously, showing Lena around the space. "And I included acoustic panels on the walls because even though you can't hear perfectly, the room should still have good sound quality for when Dad and I talk to you from the doorway." "It's perfect," Lena said, her throat tight. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Also, I made this." Mia produced a hand-lettered sign that read, "Lena's office, please knock," decorated with drawings of cats and design tools. "For the door, so people know this is your professional workspace." Lena pulled Mia into a hug, this fierce, smart girl who'd accepted her into their family with such uncomplicated enthusiasm. "I love it, and I love you." She felt Mia's surprise, the slight stiffening before she melted into the embrace. "I love you too," Mia said, her voice muffled against Lena's shoulder. "I'm glad you're staying forever." "Forever is a long time." "Good. That's how long we're keeping you." That night, after Mia was asleep and the last of the boxes had been unpacked, Ethan and Lena sat on the back porch despite the February cold. The yard was dark except for the glow from the kitchen window, and the sky above was clear enough to show stars struggling against the city's light pollution. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders, sharing warmth against the chill. "Good. Scared. Happy. All of it at once." Lena leaned into him, watching her breath fog in the cold air. Is it always going to feel this intense? Probably not. Eventually it'll just feel normal. You being here, being part of this. I like the sound of that. Normal. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Lena found herself thinking about that night in the cafe, about how completely lost she'd felt, how certain that Marcus's cruelty had confirmed everything she'd secretly believed about herself. If someone had told her then that 6 months later she'd be here, living with a man who loved her, helping raise his daughter, building a family from shared understanding and choice, she would never have believed them. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me that night, for stepping in when you didn't have to, for choosing me every day since. Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. You don't have to thank me for that. Loving you isn't a favor I'm doing you. It's a gift you're giving me. Pretty sure it works both ways. Then we're both lucky. He kissed her temple, gentle and sweet. Come on, let's go inside before we freeze to death. That would really put a damper on our first official night as roommates. So romantic. I'm nothing if not practical. Spring arrived gradually, winter loosening its grip one day at a time, until suddenly the trees were budding and Mia was campaigning for a garden. She'd developed an intense interest in sustainable agriculture, which meant Ethan and Lena spent a weekend in March building raised beds in the backyard and arguing about optimal plant spacing. The tomatoes need 18 inches, Mia insisted, consulting the notebook where she'd compiled extensive research. Any closer, and they'll compete for nutrients. The book says 12 to 18 inches, Ethan countered. We could split the difference. Splitting the difference is how you get suboptimal tomatoes. Do you want suboptimal tomatoes, Dad? I'm starting to think I want no tomatoes. Lena watched them bicker with affection, her hands dirty from the soil they'd been amending with compost. This was her life now, weekend projects and good-natured arguments, the constant surprise of being included without having to ask. She'd started attending Mia's school events, meeting teachers and other parents who gradually stopped seeing her as Ethan's girlfriend and started seeing her as part of the family unit. Some still asked awkward questions about her deafness, but Lena was learning to handle them with grace rather than defensiveness, understanding that curiosity didn't always equal judgment. The ASL class had become a weekly anchor, a space where Lena felt part of a larger community of people who understood what it meant to navigate between worlds. She'd become friends with Patricia and several other parents, and they'd started a monthly dinner group where everyone signed and no one had to worry about being left out of conversations. Martin had pulled her aside one evening to tell her she was a natural teacher, asking if she'd ever considered working with newly deaf adults who were learning to sign. The idea had taken root in her mind, growing into something that felt like possibility. In April, Mia's hearing took another downturn. They'd been expecting it. The doctors had warned that her hearing loss would progress in stages, but expectation didn't make it easier. Lena came home from a client meeting to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his face drawn with the kind of exhaustion that came from holding yourself together when you wanted to fall apart. She can barely hear me now, even with the aids, he said without preamble. The audiologist says we're looking at maybe 6 months before she's completely deaf, maybe less. Lena set down her bag and went to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind. How's she handling it? Better than I am. She's upset, but she's also... Ethan's voice cracked. She's so brave. She told me it's okay because she'll still have sign language, and she'll still have us. And I want to rage at the unfairness of it, that my 9-year-old has to be brave about losing something she should never have to lose. You're allowed to rage, to grieve, to feel everything you're feeling. But not in front of her. She needs me to be strong. Lena moved around to crouch in front of him, taking his hands. She needs you to be honest, to show her that feeling sad or angry or scared doesn't make you weak, that you can feel those things and still be okay. What if I'm not okay? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what this is, remember? We don't have to carry things alone anymore. They sat there in the kitchen's fading light, holding on to each other, and when Mia came downstairs later, she found them still there. She looked between them with knowing eyes, this child who'd grown up too fast in some ways and stayed beautifully young in others. It's okay to be sad, she signed, her movements firm and certain. I'm sad too, but I'm also okay. and we're going to be okay. All of us. She was right, Lena realized over the following months. They were okay, even as Mia's hearing faded and the accommodations they'd been preparing for became daily necessities. They were okay when Mia came home crying because a classmate had called her broken, and Ethan had to explain that some people's ignorance made them cruel. They were okay when Mia decided she wanted to transfer to a deaf school for middle school, where she could be part of a community that understood her instead of constantly explaining herself to people who didn't. They were okay through all the small adjustments and larger transformations that came with building a life together. Summer brought Mia's 10th birthday, and this time the party was at their house. Their house, not just Ethan's, because Lena had stopped mentally separating herself from this space she'd made home. They invited Mia's friends from both her hearing school and the deaf community and watched with satisfaction as kids who'd never met before found ways to communicate, bridging the gap between their different languages with the creativity only children possessed. Emma brought her mother and brother, and Patricia spent an hour talking to Lena about possibly co-teaching an ASL class for adults at the community center. "You have a gift for making people feel comfortable," Patricia said, "for explaining things without making anyone feel stupid for not knowing. That's rare." The idea excited Lena more than she'd expected. Her graphic design work was satisfying, but this, helping people learn to communicate, building bridges between communities, this felt like purpose. She started volunteering with Martin, assisting in his classes, and discovered she loved teaching almost as much as she loved the look on people's faces when they successfully signed their first full conversation. It was a Tuesday in late August when everything came full circle. Lena had gone to the Riverside Cafe to meet a potential client, choosing the same location where Marcus had humiliated her nearly a year ago. She hadn't been back since that night, had actively avoided the place, but the client had suggested it, and Lena had agreed before her anxiety could override her. Walking through the door felt like stepping into a memory, the cafe exactly as she remembered it: exposed brick, Edison bulbs, the hiss of the espresso machine. She claimed a table, not the same one but close enough, and waited. The client never showed, sending an apologetic text about a family emergency. Lena ordered a latte and pulled out her laptop, planning to work for an hour before heading home. She was deep in a logo redesign when someone approached her table. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I saw you sitting alone and I just—" The woman paused, and Lena looked up to find a stranger about her age, nervous and kind-eyed. "I saw what happened here almost a year ago, with that terrible man who said those horrible things to you. I've thought about that night so many times, wishing I'd said something, done something. And when I saw you here today, I just wanted to tell you that you deserved so much better than how he treated you." Lena sat back, surprised. "You remember that?" "Everyone here remembers. The staff still talk about it sometimes, about how awful it was and how they wish they'd thrown him out." The woman twisted her hands together. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm deaf too. Bilateral cochlear implants, and watching him treat you that way, hearing the things he said, it brought back every terrible date I've ever had, every person who made me feel like my deafness made me less than. I'm sorry you experienced that." "I'm sorry you did." Sarah gestured at the empty chair. "Can I sit? Just for a minute?" They talked for over an hour, trading stories about navigating the dating world as deaf women, about the assumptions people made and the accommodations they refused to make. Sarah was funny and sharp, and by the time they exchanged numbers, Lena felt like she'd made a genuine friend rather than just an acquaintance. Driving home later, Lena thought about the strange symmetry of it, returning to the place of her humiliation and finding connection instead. That night had felt like an ending, like confirmation of every fear she'd carried about being too much, too difficult, too different. But it had actually been a beginning, the first domino in a chain reaction that had led her here, to this life, to this family. She found Ethan in the kitchen making dinner while Mia set the table, both of them signing to each other about something that made Mia laugh. They looked up when Lena entered, and the welcome in their faces made her heart squeeze with gratitude. "How was the meeting?" Ethan asked, pulling her in for a kiss. "The client canceled, but I met someone interesting, a deaf woman who remembered that night with Marcus. We talked for hours." The universe is poetic like that sometimes. Apparently, Lena moved to help Mia with the silverware, falling into the easy rhythm of their evening routine. "What are we eating?" "Dad's attempting lasagna," Mia signed with exaggerated skepticism. I give it a 60% chance of success. 60% is generous, Ethan said. I'm thinking more like 55. Then we'll order pizza if it goes wrong, Lena said. Either way, we're eating together. That's what matters. They ate dinner at the table Lena had helped pick out, in the house she'd made home, with the people who'd become her family. Conversation flowed in that particular blend of sign and speech that was uniquely theirs, and Lena felt the same contentment she'd felt that night months ago, doing homework with Mia while Ethan cooked. The realization that this was her life, not something she was borrowing or trying on, but something she'd chosen and built and earned through the simple courage of showing up. After dinner, Mia recruited them for a new board game she'd gotten for her birthday, something complicated involving resource management and strategic planning. They played on the living room floor, Mia coaching them through the rules with the patience of someone who'd clearly read the instruction manual multiple times. Ethan kept making deliberately bad moves that made Mia lecture him about proper strategy, while Lena quietly built up her resources and ended up winning by a landslide. "You hustled us," Ethan accused. "I simply paid attention to the rules." "Mia, your mother is a shark." The words were out before he could stop them, and suddenly the room went very quiet. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, the weight of that casual label, mother, settling over her shoulders like a cloak. She looked at Mia, who'd gone still, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," Ethan started. I shouldn't have assumed." Mia signed something so quickly, Lena almost missed it. "Say it again?" Mia's hands moved slower this time, deliberate and certain. "I liked it. When Dad called you my mother. If that's okay with you." Lena felt tears gather in her eyes, hot and sudden. "It's more than okay. If it's what you want, it's what I want." Mia came around the board game and climbed into Lena's lap despite being nearly too big for it, wrapping her arms around Lena's neck. "You're my family. That makes you my mom, right? Even if you didn't give birth to me?" "Family isn't about biology," Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's about choice, about showing up, about loving each other even when it's hard." "Then you're definitely my mom, because you choose us every day." They sat there on the floor surrounded by game pieces and dice, the three of them holding on to each other, and Lena thought about how far she'd come from that night in the cafe, how that moment of cruelty had somehow led to this moment of perfect acceptance. She'd spent so long believing that her deafness made her unworthy of love, that any relationship would eventually collapse under the weight of accommodation and patience required. But Ethan and Mia had shown her that real love didn't see her disability as a burden. It simply saw her, all of her, and chose her anyway. Later, after Mia had gone to bed and Ethan and Lena were cleaning up the game, he pulled her into an embrace. "I'm sorry for springing that on you," he said. "I should have asked first if you were comfortable with—" Lena stopped him with a kiss. "Don't apologize. It was perfect. She's perfect. This whole messy, complicated, beautiful thing we've built is perfect." "I love you," Ethan said, signing it as he spoke, making sure she could understand in every language they shared. "I love you too, both of you. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared. The kind that means I have something worth protecting." They finished cleaning up and went to bed, and Lena fell asleep wrapped in Ethan's arms, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around them. In the room down the hall, Mia slept surrounded by whale posters and books about marine biology, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and chosen and enough exactly as she was. The seasons continued their reliable cycle. Autumn arrived with its burning colors, winter with its crystalline cold. Lena and Ethan celebrated their first anniversary with a quiet dinner while Mia stayed at Emma's house, toasting to the unlikely chance that had brought them together. Spring returned, and with it Mia's 11th birthday, the garden they'd planted together producing tomatoes that were indeed optimal, much to Mia's satisfaction. Through it all, Lena continued to teach ASL classes, finding deep satisfaction in watching people learn to communicate in new ways. She took on fewer design clients, focusing instead on the teaching that felt like calling rather than just career. Ethan's architecture firm promoted him to partner, a recognition of the innovative work he'd been doing designing accessible spaces. and Mia thrived at her new school, finally part of a community where signing wasn't special accommodation, but simply the language everyone spoke. On an evening in early June, Lena found herself back at the Riverside Cafe with Sarah, who'd become a close friend in the 2 years since their first conversation. They met monthly to catch up, to trade stories about their lives, to remind each other that they weren't alone in navigating a hearing world with deaf ears. "I have news," Sarah said, signing with barely contained excitement. "I met someone through the dating app you recommended, and he signs. He learned for his deaf sister, and he's wonderful." "That's amazing," Lena signed back, genuinely happy. "When do I get to meet him?" "Next week. We're doing a group dinner thing. You and Ethan should come." They made plans, and as they talked, Lena noticed a young woman at a nearby table, clearly on a first date that wasn't going well. The man across from her kept checking his phone, his body language screaming disinterest. When he finally made an excuse and left, the woman sat there alone, her expression a mirror of how Lena had felt that night so long ago. Lena made a decision. She approached the table carefully, making sure the woman could see her before she spoke. "I'm sorry if this is intrusive, but I saw what just happened, and I wanted to tell you that guy is an idiot who doesn't deserve your time." The woman looked up, surprised. "Thanks. I thought this might actually go somewhere, you know?" "I know, but sometimes the dates that go nowhere lead us to the places we're supposed to end up." Lena gestured at Sarah, who was watching with interest. "A terrible date at this exact cafe 2 years ago led me to the love of my life. You never know what's coming." "That's oddly comforting." "Good. You deserve better than someone who can't see how lucky they are to be here with you." Lena smiled and returned to her table, feeling Sarah's knowing look. "Very smooth," Sarah signed, "passing on the wisdom." "Someone did it for me once. Seemed only right to return the favor." They finished their coffee and parted ways, and Lena drove home through the summer evening, windows down to feel the warm air. The house was lit when she arrived. Ethan's car in the driveway, alongside Mia's bike that she'd left sprawled across the path again. Lena stepped over it and went inside, following the sound of voices to the backyard. She found them in the garden, Ethan showing Mia how to stake the tomato plants that had grown tall and heavy with fruit. They were signing to each other, their hands moving in the golden evening light, and they were so absorbed in what they were doing that they didn't notice her right away. Lena stood there watching them, these two people who'd become her whole world, and felt gratitude so profound it took her breath away. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, sitting alone in a cafe, convinced that Marcus's cruelty had confirmed her worst fears about herself. She thought about how close she'd come to believing him, to accepting that she was too much trouble, too complicated, too different to deserve love. And she thought about Ethan stepping forward when he didn't have to, about Mia's unquestioning acceptance, about the family they'd built from shared understanding and deliberate choice, about how the worst night of her life had led to the best days, because sometimes endings were just beginnings in disguise. Mia looked up and saw her, her face breaking into a grin. "Mom, come help us. Dad's doing the knots wrong again." "I am not," Ethan protested. "These are structurally sound knots. They're disasters. Mom, tell him." Lena crossed the yard to her family, to the garden they'd grown together, to the life they were still building day by day. She wrapped her arms around both of them, holding tight, and knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. She'd been invisible for so long, hiding from a world that often failed to see her. But Ethan and Mia had made her visible, had made her matter, had shown her that being different wasn't the same as being less. They'd chosen her, and she'd chosen them. And in that mutual choosing, they'd created something that felt like magic but was actually just love. Messy and complicated and absolutely real. "Your knots are fine," Lena told Ethan, signing so Mia could see. "But we're going to redo them anyway because Mia has a vision and we respect the vision." "The vision involves optimal plant support," Mia signed with dignity. "Obviously, we wouldn't dream of suboptimal plant support." They worked together in the garden as the summer evening deepened into night, and Lena thought about second chances and found families and the courage it took to believe you deserved both. She thought about a cafe where strangers had witnessed her humiliation and how one of those strangers had become a friend who understood. She thought about the community she'd found in ASL classes and the purpose she'd discovered in teaching others to communicate. But mostly she thought about this moment, right here, right now. Her hands dirty with garden soil, her daughter explaining proper tomato care with scientific precision, her partner's shoulder warm against hers. The evening air soft on her skin, the last light painting everything gold, the feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest form, patient and accommodating and absolutely unshakable. And Lena finally, completely, believed she deserved every precious moment of it.